Jenny, one of the resources that I obtained from Econet and that I've certainly used extensively in my own work was your guide to planning communication into science. And I specifically liked it that you didn't just call it science communication planning, but planning communication into science. And this idea that planning communication is an integral part of planning science. What I would really appreciate if you could briefly just share the 7 steps with us that you propose in that plan, and maybe elaborate a little bit about specifically the message design step.
Of course, but first I should stress that what you just raised in your question about planning into science is vital. I think that planning saves time, it saves money, and it saves stress, or your sanity, if you like. And it needs to happen. If a research project has happened, I think it needs to happen right at the start of that research. It needs to be interwoven with the research goals, with the activities that researchers are happening. And I think that's the best way and the best process of planning it. It shouldn't be a beautiful document. It should be a working document that is part of the research project, part of the event that you're trying to manage, rather than being something separate. And the 7 steps that I've come up with are very much within that research project context in particular. I mean, it can be applied to organisations, it can be applied to specific events, but it's very much about a specific research project and building it into that, a research program. And I start with who. Many people start with why, or the objectives, or some people start with the how, and they say, well, let's produce a brochure, or let's get some media out there.
Familiar, yeah.
Or let's make a video. And you say, why? They go, oh, because that would be good. We could get all of our things put into that brochure or that video. And then I say, well, who would read it? And they go, well, everyone.
Yeah.
And they don't really think about it. And really, the best communication is based on knowing who you want to speak with, who you want to communicate with. And so starting with who is where I like to start. Don't always, but that's where I like to start. So that's the first step, the who. Some people refer to it as the target audience or the stakeholders, but I like to just think about people, real people, and about who. Second step then is your communication objectives, the why. Why do you want to communicate to those people? Do you want to raise their awareness? Do you want to inform them? Do you want to consult them? Do you want to involve them in something? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to change behaviours? Are you trying to change attitudes? They're all communication objectives, which are quite separate to your research objectives. That's step 2. Step 3 is the most important step, I think, which is, this is where the research side comes in, which is to find out the perceptions, concerns and needs of the people we want to communicate with. This might require you going out and listening and researching and finding those things out. But this will make the rest of your plan effective. It's often the step that's most overlooked, and it's often a step where we make assumptions about how people view our project, how they understand it, what they want from it, how do they want to get information, how do they want to be involved, what sort of information do they want. They're all part of that step, which drives the rest of the plan in many ways. And then it's only then that you can actually do the 4th step, which is that message design step. And this message design step really takes this risk communication approach with these 3 magic questions, which I use in all my communication, whether it's a plan or not. And the first question to ask is, well, what do I want to get across about this research? What do I want to get across? And that's usually easy to answer. Researchers give me lots on that first question. Second question is, but what does this group really want to know about this research? What are the questions that are raised in their head? Which means that you need to get into their shoes and walk around. Then the third question really makes sure that the messages are as clear as possible and won't be misinterpreted, which is, what could this group get wrong unless I stress the correct information? And when you've answered those 3 questions, you have a checklist, which I always keep because it's a good way of seeing how well my messages are being put into things that are written, presentations, media releases and so on. But from that, I try to distill 3 core messages that take into account those 3 questions. And it's a simple tool, but extremely powerful if done properly. So that's step 4.
Okay.
Step 5 is when you look at how you're going to communicate, and that very much should reflect how people said they wanted to be communicated with, how they wanted to be involved, what sort of information they wanted, how they wanted to get it, and that should reflect very much that step 3.
Oh.
And your budget, of course, and resources. And then the next step is building in the evaluation, which has 2 parts to it. It's firstly evaluating as you go, or monitoring as you go. You know, when you're designing your fact sheet, check it out, test it with a sample of your audience, and make sure the messages are clear and that they like the design and it's easy to read before you finalise it and print it. So that's sort of ongoing and monitoring, asking for feedback. And then there's the evaluation you do at the end. Has the plan achieved what you wanted? And to be successful at measuring that, you need to have objectives that can be measured, which often means that you need baseline data. For example, if one of your objectives is to raise awareness, then you need to know what the awareness level is now. And then you might say, I want to raise it by 10%. And then at the end of a 2-year research project or something, you can measure whether awareness has been raised by that 10%. So it's important to have that beginning data to do that summative end of project type of evaluation. Then once you've done that for each of your target groups, and you really should have prioritised so you don't have more than 3 or 4 main groups that you're communicating with, you can put together an action plan that goes across those groups, and that's step 7. And step 7, the action plan, really requires you to think about who's going to do what, when, where, why, how, with what money. And that may go back and influence what you said you're going to do as well, because you may not have the resources. But, I mean, to make an action plan really successful, you shouldn't try and do too much. So don't try and do too many activities to start off with. Secondly, it should be a short time period, like 3 to 6 months. And then you might change it after 3 months and update it. I mean, these plans need to be constantly updated, and action plans probably change more than anything. And the third thing is, probably the most important thing, is you need someone who drives that plan, who champions or leads it. Otherwise, a communication plan or strategy may just end up as a beautiful document on someone's shelf and never see the light of day in terms of its implementation. And I've seen lots of strategies and plans end up like that, and it makes me sad.
I think that's really fantastic, almost like a roadmap to take you through. I want to just take you back briefly to number 1 and just ask your advice on this. So often I've seen communication plans where the first who is the general public, or I've even seen a plan where the person said, I want to reach every child in every corner of South Africa. Now, instinctively, there's a problem here. So what is your advice when people, to think about those very broad kind of categories?
Well, I can't picture the general public. So they really need to be quite specific in that. By the general public, do they mean, for example, the neighbouring communities to a national park? Do they mean the cities, the capital cities? I mean, who are they meaning, and who in that public are they trying to get to? I think many science communicators fall into this trap of what's known as the imagined public. We imagine this public out there, which are very much the same as each other, but they're not. So we need to be quite specific about who we want to get to within that public, and that should fit within the overall research context. So for many of the projects I deal with, for example, we want to get to farmers who live in country and work in country that's marginal, that's going to be most affected by increasing climate change. And so that's a very distinct group of people that want to get to. And so we need to be that specific, I think, rather than using words like general public or school children. School children where? Which schools? What age group? We need to be specific.
I think that's probably maybe also one of the reasons why many plans fail is if you're too general and too broad and too ambitious, possibly. But I really also value the advice to not just blindly go and produce a video or a brochure that may not ever really get used and spend a huge amount of money on that, rather than spending the money on focused and detailed planning of what you really need to do.
Absolutely. I often ask people, what do you do when you're given a brochure by a project, a program, or an organisation? What do you do?
And they all say it goes in the bin, I guess.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, because
Yeah.
that's exactly what I do.
Yeah,
I might file it for a little while, and then I think I'll be cleaning out my files and think, oh, bin.
Yeah. Recycling,
Yeah,
hopefully.
yes, exactly. And there's so much money wasted on efforts that really are not achieving what you want to achieve.
Right. Thank you very much, Jenny.